June 17th, Indiana Fever versus Connecticut Sun, a game that seemed routine on the surface. But the moment Jacy Sheldon's finger went straight into Caitlin Clark's eye, everything shifted. Clark reacted the way anyone would. She pushed back, creating distance between herself and the player who just drove contact into her face. That push should have been forgotten in seconds. Instead, the referees assessed her a technical foul. The arena went completely sideways. Fans pointed at the replay boards showing the eye poke on repeat. The Fever bench was on its feet. Everyone in the building knew something was fundamentally wrong with that call. But here's the thing, this moment didn't happen in isolation. It wasn't just about one eye poke, one wrong call, or one technical foul. This was the culmination of weeks of escalating physicality, missed calls, injured teammates, and a pattern of negligence from officials who had failed to protect Indiana's players. Caitlin Clark had been watching. Sophie Cunningham had been keeping score. And by the time that final minute arrived, everyone was about to see exactly what happens when players decide to answer questions the referees won't. Third quarter. The game is already chippy, both teams pushing boundaries, both sets of officials letting more slide than they should. The tension has been building since the opening tip, the kind of invisible pressure that only grows with each contact, each bump, each moment of restraint before someone finally snaps. Caitlin Clark brings the ball up the court. Jacy Sheldon comes over to defend, and she reaches in hard, not a casual swipe, not a standard defensive effort. A full commitment reach for a steal attempt that goes too far. Sheldon's finger goes straight into Clark's eye socket, not near it, not brushing it. Directly into it at full speed. Clark's head snaps back from the force of the contact. She grabs her face with both hands, squinting hard, trying to get her vision clear. Her entire body language shifts in that instant, not from competitiveness, not from game intensity, but from genuine pain. Anyone watching could see exactly what happened. This wasn't incidental contact. This wasn't a brush. A finger went into an eye at full speed, and Clark reacted the way any human being on the planet would react. She pushed Sheldon away from her. One firm push creating distance between herself and the player who just drove contact into her eye. That push lasted maybe 2 seconds. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't escalating. It was a defensive response to an offensive action. A player saying, "Don't do that again," with her body language. The referees immediately assessed Clark a technical foul for the push. Sheldon received a flagrant one for the eye poke. In theory, that sounds balanced. In practice, it created something completely backwards. The punishment for the victim matched the punishment for the aggressor. That is the part that nobody could get their head around. The arena reacted instantly. Fans were pointing at the replay boards, the eye poke playing on repeat. The Fever bench was on its feet, every player standing, gestures wild, confusion turning into frustration. The announcers called it out immediately. This was the wrong call, and everyone in the building knew it. But knowing it and stopping it are two different things. The technical foul had been assessed. The message had been sent. And that message was crystal clear to every player watching. Go after Clark with dangerous plays, and if she reacts at all, if she protects herself in any way, she will be the one facing consequences. Clark had just scored big in her comeback game. She was leading her team, controlling the tempo, playing at an elite level. And she was standing there holding her eye, penalized for defending herself, watching the officials completely miss the point of what had just happened on their court. The technical foul wasn't just a bad call in isolation. It was a statement about how this game was going to be officiated for the rest of the night. It suggested that physicality would be tolerated, that dangerous plays would be tolerated, that as long as you weren't flagrantly obvious about it, you could get away with it. And if the victim complained, the victim would be the one punished. Sophie Cunningham was watching all of this from the bench. She had her own memories of May 30th still fresh in her mind. She knew exactly what it felt like to be on the receiving end of physicality that went unpunished. She knew the frustration of watching officials miss obvious contact, obvious danger, obvious targeting. And now she was watching it happen again, to her teammate, in real time, during a game that mattered. The technical on Clark had barely been called when Marina Mabrey made a decision that would shock everyone in the building. Clark was still processing what had just happened. Her eye was hurting. A technical foul was on her record. The crowd was still reacting around her. The Fever bench was still in disbelief. It was chaotic, loud, and tense in the way that playoff-level games get when the officials lose control. And then Mabrey came out of nowhere and body-checked Clark to the floor. There was no loose ball. There was no play happening. This wasn't a collision during live action. Mabrey crossed the court, drove her shoulder directly into Clark, and sent her stumbling backward onto the hardwood. This was deliberate. This was a response to the chaos. This was a statement being made in real time. The Fever bench exploded. Every single player on Indiana's roster was on their feet pointing at Mabrey. Coach Stephanie White was on the sidelines screaming at the officials, gesturing wildly, demanding that someone in stripes acknowledge what had just happened directly in front of them. The referees went to the monitor. They reviewed the play for what felt like an unreasonably long time. Multiple angles, multiple officials crowded around the screen, the entire arena waiting in a loud, tense silence for the ruling. The call, technical foul on Marina Mabrey. The same technical foul they had just given Clark for pushing someone away after getting her eye poked. In that moment, the message became impossible to ignore. The officiating had created a system where players couldn't protect themselves, where dangerous plays went unpunished, where the only recourse left was for players to take matters into their own hands. And by the end of the third quarter, that's exactly what was about to happen. Most fans watching the June 17th game thought they were watching a regular season WNBA rivalry heat up for the first time. What they were actually watching was the continuation of something that started years earlier inside a Big Ten gymnasium during college games that most people have already forgot. Caitlin Clark and Jacy Sheldon did not meet for the first time as professionals. Their history goes all the way back to Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes and Sheldon's Ohio State Buckeyes, two of the most competitive programs in the Big Ten Conference, sharing a division, playing each other multiple times every single season. These weren't casual matchups. These were games that mattered. Programs with history, with resources, with fan bases that cared deeply about the outcome. Every time these two teams lined up, there was legitimate stakes. And within those games, within that framework of competition, Jacy Sheldon made it a mission to get under Caitlin Clark's skin every single time they shared the court. Sheldon's approach was systematic. She would shadow Clark on every possession, staying attached to her, making sure Clark couldn't get comfortable. She would bump her on every screen, physical contact that was technically legal but designed to disrupt rhythm and create frustration. She would talk throughout every dead ball, not just occasionally, but consistently. The kind of persistent, grinding defense that wears a player down mentally as much as physically. It's a legitimate strategy in basketball. Every program uses some version of it. But Sheldon executed it with a specific target in mind, and that target was Caitlin Clark's composure. The theory behind the approach made sense on paper. If you can get an opponent frustrated, if you can distract them mentally, if you can make them think about the defense instead of the offense, you've already won half the battle. It works sometimes. Clark is human, and Sheldon knew exactly which buttons to push. She understood that Clark thrives on rhythm, on flow, on controlling the game at her own pace. By constantly interrupting that pace, by being physically present in every moment, by never allowing Clark a single possession without resistance, Sheldon was playing a game within the game. But here's what Sheldon may not have fully calculated. Doing that to Caitlin Clark does not discourage her. It motivates her. Every bump, every trash talk moment, every physical play that came at her, Clark filed it all away and came back harder. She would respond with a 3. She would answer with an assist. She would make a play that proved she was operating on a different level despite the constant physical pressure. Instead of breaking Clark's focus, Sheldon's defense was actually strengthening Clark's resolve. It was turning a basketball game into a personal challenge, and Clark has never backed down from a personal challenge. When both players entered the WNBA draft, the expectation might have been that this rivalry would stay in college. That turning professional would mean turning a page, moving past high school and college rivalries, focusing on new competition and new challenges. But the rivalry didn't stay in college. It traveled with them. Clark to the Indiana Fever. Sheldon to the Connecticut Sun. Same conference, different league, but the same edge every single time they shared a court. Every game between these two franchises carries that undercurrent. You can feel it in how quickly the physical play escalates when Clark and Sheldon are defending each other specifically. You can hear it in how the crowd reacts every time they get close on the court. The fans recognize it. The announcers reference it. This is not just two competitive players doing their jobs. This is two people who genuinely bring out the most intense version of each other. the kind of rivalry that transcends regular season statistics and playoff positioning. Sheldon's approach in the WNBA remained consistent with her college strategy. Shadow, bump, talk, disrupt. She understood her role and executed it with precision. But the physicality of professional basketball is different from college. The athletes are stronger, faster, and the contact carries more force. The same defensive strategy that worked in college could carry different consequences at the professional level. That history is critical for understanding May 30th. Sheldon was not playing aggressively out of nowhere. She was not waking up that morning deciding to be dirty or reckless. She was playing exactly the way she has always played against Clark. Relentless, physical, right on the edge. That's her identity as a defender. The difference on May 30th was that the officials gave her the green light to go further than she ever had before. They allowed the physicality to escalate beyond what would normally be tolerated, and two of Clark's teammates paid the price for it. Clark remembered every second of it. She carried the memory of watching Sophie Cunningham go down hard. She carried the image of Sydney Carlson's leg bending unnaturally. She filed those moments away, just like she filed away every bump and every piece of trash talk from their college days. And when Sheldon showed up on June 17th doing the same thing, shadowing Clark, bumping on screens, getting in her face, Clark already knew exactly what was coming next. She had seen this movie before. The only question was whether the officials would finally step in or whether the Fever would have to handle this themselves. May 30th was supposed to be simple. Just another regular season game. Indiana Fever versus Connecticut Sun. Two competitive teams, both with something to prove, both fighting for position as the season slowly started to take shape. On paper, it looked like a solid matchup, physical, intense, but still within the boundaries of what professional basketball is supposed to be. Nothing about it suggested chaos. Nothing about it hinted at the kind of night that would stay with players long after the final buzzer. But from the very first quarter, something felt off. Not in an obvious way at first. It wasn't one single moment that flipped the tone. It was a buildup of small signals that started to stack on top of each other, the kind of physicality that didn't feel controlled. Contact that lingered just a second too long. Movements that crossed the thin line between aggressive play and something more careless, because there is a difference. Physical basketball is part of the game. It's expected. It's respected. Reckless basketball is something else entirely. As the game unfolded, that distinction became impossible to ignore. At the center of it all was Jacy Sheldon. Her involvement in two separate plays didn't just impact the game, it changed its entire direction. The first moment came early, involving Sophie Cunningham. It didn't look like anything unusual at a glance. A routine sequence. Players moving at speed, positioning for the next action. But then the contact came, sudden, forceful, and far from subtle. It wasn't just hard, it was the kind of impact that makes people pause. Cunningham went down and she stayed down. That alone said everything. Because players like Cunningham don't stay on the floor unless something is seriously wrong. She has built a reputation on toughness, on pushing through contact, on getting back up no matter what. So when she didn't immediately rise, the energy shifted. The Fever bench went quiet. Not frustrated, not shouting, just still. Days later, the full reality of that moment became even clearer. Cunningham returned with visible damage. Part of her front tooth was gone from the impact, a detail that might seem small on paper, but in reality, it told the full story of how violent that contact actually was. That was the first crack in the night. The second one came soon after, involving Sydney Carlson. A loose ball situation, the kind that usually brings out maximum effort from everyone on the floor. Players dive, stretch, reach, all in an attempt to gain possession. It's chaotic, but it's still supposed to follow a certain level of awareness. Sheldon went for the ball, but instead of a clean dive, she came down directly onto Carlson's leg, and everything went wrong. The leg bent in a way it wasn't supposed to. Not slightly, not debatably, completely unnatural. The kind of movement that makes your stomach drop before you even process what you're seeing. Carlson hit the floor immediately. No delay, no attempt to shake it off, just down. And here's where the moment crossed into something even more difficult to understand. No whistle. The referees were right there. Clear view. No obstruction. No confusion about where the contact happened or how it unfolded. And still nothing. No foul called. No stoppage acknowledging what had just taken place. When you watch the replay, it becomes even harder to process. Carlson is positioned between Sheldon and the ball. She has established space. And yet the dive goes through her, not around her, directly into her knee. That's not just physical play, that's dangerous. And it went completely unpunished. 2 separate incidents, 2 Fever players injured, both involving the same opposing player, and 0 accountability from the officials managing the game. The scoreboard would show an 85-83 loss for Indiana, a close game, a 2-point difference that matters in standings, in playoff positioning, in season narratives. But inside that locker room, that number didn't carry the most weight, because what stayed with them wasn't the loss. It was the feeling that the game had slipped out of control and no one stepped in to fix it. 2 of their players walked away hurt, and from their perspective, it didn't have to happen that way. After the game, Caitlin Clark handled the moment the way professionals are expected to. Her comments were short, focused, careful not to escalate anything publicly. But sometimes, words don't tell the full story. Body language does. The way she moved through the handshake line, composed but distant. The expression during the post-game interview, not emotional, not shaken, but something else entirely. Focused. There was no visible frustration spilling out and no anger directed outward. Just a quiet shift. The kind that suggests something has been noted, remembered, and stored away for later. Because while everyone else was reacting to what had just happened, she was already thinking ahead. Already looking toward the next time these 2 teams would meet again. Already counting down to June 17th. Moments like May 30th don't disappear when the final buzzer sounds. They stay. They replay in conversations, in film sessions, in quiet moments between practices. Every detail gets remembered, not just the big plays, but the small ones too. The missed calls, the collisions, the silence from officials when something should have been addressed. The Indiana Fever didn't forget any of it, not a single second. They carried it with them for weeks. And when the schedule brought Connecticut Sun back into their path, this wasn't just another game anymore. It was unfinished business. Not just about winning, but about answering everything that night left unresolved. Clark came into June 17th locked in. The week before, she had just dropped a dominant performance against the previously undefeated New York Liberty. She was back from a 3-week quad injury that had sidelined her, and the rust that sometimes comes with extended time away was completely gone. The confidence was back. The rhythm was back. Everything that makes Caitlin Clark dangerous on a basketball court was operating at full capacity. Playing Connecticut Sun, the team whose player had hurt 2 of her teammates just weeks earlier, gave her something extra to play for. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about answering a question that May 30th had posed. What happens when these teams meet again? What happens when Sheldon brings the same physical approach and the officials are watching more closely? What happens when Clark has something personal on the line, not just competitiveness, but a legitimate grievance that everyone in the arena understood? Sheldon was on her from the jump. Same tactics, same aggression, same approach she has used against Clark since their college days. Bumping on screens, getting physical in transition, talking during dead balls. The crowd could feel what was building from the opening minutes. The energy in the arena was different from a regular season game. There was anticipation. There was history. There was the sense that something was going to give before this game ended. The first half stayed chippy but controlled. Both teams were pushing limits. Both sets of officials were letting more go than they probably should have. The physicality was elevated, but it wasn't yet at the breaking point. It was like watching 2 fighters circling each other, testing range, feeling out how much the referee would tolerate. Jabs being thrown, clinches being broken up. Small moments of escalation followed by periods of relative calm. The tension had nowhere to go but up. Clark was playing well, not just executing offensively, but doing it while being constantly harassed by Sheldon. Every possession, Sheldon was there. Every attempt to get open, there was contact. Every moment Clark tried to operate in rhythm, there was disruption. It's the same game Sheldon has played against Clark for years. But Clark was handling it the way she always does, by playing through it, by responding to pressure with better play, by letting her basketball speak louder than anything Sheldon could do defensively. By the time the third quarter arrived, the game had evolved into something more tense than the first half. The officials had settled into a pattern of letting contact go. Sheldon had settled into a pattern of playing more aggressive as the game went on. And Clark had settled into a pattern of remaining composed despite the constant pressure. It was a dynamic that had been building all game long, and everyone in the arena could feel it. The crowd was into it. This wasn't just basketball anymore. This was a story. This was a continuation of something from May 30th. This was old rivals with legitimate grievances meeting on the court. The announcers were feeling it. The benches were feeling it. Even the officials had to be aware that this game had an edge to it that went beyond regular season basketball. Sheldon continued her familiar approach. Physical, relentless, right on the edge of what the officials would tolerate. But there was something different about June 17th compared to previous matchups. Previous games had been competitive, but they had been contained within the normal boundaries of basketball rivalry. This game had a specific tension, a specific context that made every contact feel weighted with meaning. Clark brought the ball up the court as she had done countless times throughout the game. Sheldon came over to defend, as she had done on virtually every possession. But this time, as Sheldon reached in hard for what looked like a steal attempt, her finger went straight into Clark's eye. In some ways, it was just another moment in a long game filled with physical contact. In other ways, it was the moment that everything changed. Because this wasn't Sheldon playing aggressive defense. This was Sheldon reaching through Clark's body, reaching past her arms, reaching directly into her face. The contact was obvious. The intent was clear. And the officials had spent the entire game establishing that they would let Sheldon play this way. But this time, there were cameras rolling from every angle. There were thousands of fans watching. There was a precedent from May 30th that made everyone acutely aware that something needed to happen. Clark reacted to her eye being poked. Sheldon received a flagrant one, and Clark received a technical, the wrong call, the absolutely backwards call, the call that would set everything in motion for what came next. Because in that moment, the officials made it clear that players couldn't protect themselves, that dangerous plays would be tolerated, that if you complained about dangerous plays, you would be punished. Sophie Cunningham was watching from the bench. She had been keeping score since May 30th. She had watched Cunningham's tooth get knocked out. She had watched Carlson's leg bend unnaturally. She had watched officials miss both of those moments. And now, she was watching her teammate get her eye poked, get penalized for reacting, and have absolutely nowhere to go for justice except to take matters into her own hands. By the end of the third quarter, everyone in the building understood what was about to happen. The question wasn't whether a response was coming. The question was what form it would take and who would deliver it. Third quarter. Clark brings the ball up the court. Sheldon comes over to defend, reaching in hard for what looks like a steal attempt. Her finger goes straight into Clark's eye. The contact is immediate. Clark's head snaps back from the force of it. She grabs her face with both hands, squinting hard, trying to get her vision clear. Anyone watching could see exactly what happened. This was not a brush, not incidental contact. A finger went into an eye socket at full speed, and Clark reacted the way any person on the planet would react. She pushed Sheldon away from her, one firm push creating distance between herself and the player who just drove contact into her eye. The referees assessed Clark a technical foul. The arena went completely sideways. Fans were pointing at the replay boards showing the eye poke on repeat. The fever bench was on its feet. The announcers called it out immediately. This was the wrong call, and everyone in the building knew it. Sheldon received a flagrant one for the eye poke. Fair enough. That's appropriate. That's the minimum consequence for driving a finger into someone's eye. But Clark also got a technical for pushing back after taking a finger to the eye. The punishment for the victim matched the punishment for the aggressor. That is the part that nobody could get their head around. The technical foul sent a message to every player watching, and it wasn't the right one. It said, go after Clark with dangerous plays, and if she reacts at all, if she defends herself in any way, she will be the one facing consequences. Clark had just scored big in her comeback game. She was leading her team. And she was standing there holding her eye, penalized for defending herself, watching the officials completely miss the point of what had just happened on their court. But the moment didn't stop there. The technical on Clark had barely been called when Marina Mabrey made a decision that shocked everyone in the building. Clark was still processing what had just happened. Her eye was hurting. A technical foul was on her record. The crowd was going crazy around her. The fever bench was still reacting in disbelief. It was chaotic, loud, and tense in the way that playoff-level games get when the officials lose control. And then Mabrey came out of nowhere and body-checked Clark to the floor. There was no loose ball. There was no play happening. There was no legitimate basketball action occurring at that moment. Mabrey crossed the court, drove her shoulder into Clark, and sent her stumbling backward onto the hardwood. The fever bench exploded. Every player on Indiana's roster was on their feet pointing at Mabrey. Coach Stephanie White was on the sidelines screaming at the officials, gesturing wildly, demanding that someone in stripes acknowledge what had just happened directly in front of them. White had been raising the alarm since the first quarter of this game. She had watched her players get targeted. She had talked to the officials repeatedly. She had warned them that if they did not get control of the physicality, something was going to give. And now here it was. Her star player just got body checked to the floor in the middle of a live game, in front of thousands of fans with cameras rolling from every angle. The referees went to the monitor. They reviewed the play for what felt like an unreasonably long time. Multiple angles, multiple officials crowded around the screen, the entire arena waiting in a loud, tense silence. The ruling, technical foul on Marina Mabrey. Not a flagrant, not an ejection, just a technical foul. The same call they had just given Clark for pushing someone away after getting her eye poked. Mabrey charges across the court and deliberately knocks Clark to the ground. Technical foul. Clark reacts to a finger in her eye. Also technical foul. The message was unavoidable at that point. The officials had created a system where there was no justice available through official channels, where dangerous plays were tolerated, where victims were penalized for reacting, where the only language the officials seemed to understand was the language of aggression and response. White went directly to the post-game press conference and did not hold back a single word. She pointed out that this had not been an isolated incident. It had been building all season long. Players were being allowed to play recklessly. Referees were not controlling it. And the league kept pointing to physicality as a feature of the game rather than acknowledging when it crossed into something dangerous. Her point was impossible to argue with. The evidence was sitting right there. 2 Fever players hurt on May 30th. Clark getting her eye poked on June 17th with no meaningful consequence for the player who did it. And Mabrey body checking Clark to the floor and walking away with a technical foul. No ejections for any of it. No acknowledgement that something had gone wrong with how this game was being officiated. No recognition that a pattern had emerged. Caitlin Clark took all of it in. The eye poke. The technical foul, Mabrey's body check, the matching technical. She absorbed it all and stayed in the game, stayed composed, stayed focused on what her team needed from her. But internally, something had shifted. She understood at that moment what everyone else in the building was beginning to understand. The officials weren't going to handle this. The league wasn't going to step in. If anything was going to change about how this game was being played, the Fever were going to have to make that change themselves. Sophie Cunningham had seen enough. She had watched the officials fail her teammates twice in the same game, fail her personally on May 30th, fail Clark twice in one quarter on June 17th. The message was crystal clear. Nobody was coming to protect the Fever. No referee was going to step up and say, "This has gone too far, this ends now." No league official was going to intervene and correct the pattern of missed calls and reversed consequences. If anything was going to be done about the way this game was being played, if anything was going to be said about the physicality that had crossed from competitive into dangerous, it was going to have to come from the players themselves. Final minute. Indiana Fever leading 87-70. At that point, the game had already told its story. The scoreboard wasn't shifting in any meaningful way. The energy that usually defines close contests, urgency, pressure, last-second decisions, it was gone. What remained was routine. Players on both sides were expected to wind things down, protect themselves, and let the clock finish what it had already decided. That's how these moments usually go. But this moment didn't follow that script. Sophie Cunningham wasn't thinking about the locker room. She wasn't thinking about running out the clock. And she definitely wasn't thinking about playing it safe. Because sometimes the final minute of a game isn't about the score at all. It's about something that's been building underneath it. Jacy Sheldon got the ball and pushed forward into a fast break. It looked like a routine transition play, the kind that fills the final seconds of a decided game. No real tension, no real stakes. But Cunningham was right there beside her. And in that split second, just as Sheldon committed to the move toward the basket, Cunningham made a decision. Not a hesitation, not a reaction. A decision. She wrapped her arms around Sheldon mid-motion and brought her down. Hard. The contact was forceful. The intent was unmistakable. There was no confusion about what just happened. No one watching needed a replay to understand it. It wasn't a mistimed defensive effort. It wasn't an accidental collision. It was deliberate. It was controlled. It was clear in its intent. And importantly, Cunningham didn't try to hide it. There was no immediate gesture of apology. No body language suggesting it had gone wrong. She stood in it, owned it, let the moment speak exactly as it was, a message, and the arena felt it instantly. Before the referees even had time to fully process the play, the crowd reacted, loud, unified, almost instinctive. Chants of Sophie, Sophie began rising from the stands, echoing across the court in a way that made it clear the fans weren't confused either. They knew what they had just seen. They understood what it represented. This wasn't interpreted as cheap or reckless in the traditional sense. It didn't carry the same feeling as a random dirty play in a tightly contested game. To the people in that building, it looked like something else entirely. A response. A line being drawn after something had gone unanswered for too long. Because in sports, there's an unspoken understanding that exists between players. When physical play crosses a certain line and nothing stops it, when officials miss obvious calls and penalize the victim, when the system fails to protect players, players eventually take matters into their own hands. That's what this felt like. Not the first language, not even the second, but the last one left when everything else, whistles, warnings, restraint, didn't seem to change anything. The officials stepped in quickly after that. The call was decisive. Flagrant 2, automatic ejection. Cunningham's night was over the moment the whistle confirmed it, but the situation didn't settle there. Emotions had already spilled over. The moment had broken something loose that couldn't be immediately contained. Players from both sides got involved. Words were exchanged. Bodies moved closer than they should have. Lindsay, Allen, and Sheldon were also ejected as the scuffle escalated. For a brief stretch, the court turned chaotic. Benches clearing, coaches stepping in. The action drifting dangerously close to the crowd before things were finally separated and order was restored. 3 ejections total. And yet, none of it changed the outcome. The Fever were still up big. The game was still over. But strangely, what happened in that final minute became bigger than the game itself. Because once the final whistle blew, the moment didn't fade. It multiplied. Clips of the foul spread across social media almost instantly. Different angles. Slow motion replays. Breakdowns, all of it circulating within minutes across every platform that existed. By midnight, millions had already seen it. By morning, it had turned into a full conversation that extended far beyond basketball circles. Cunningham's jersey sold out online within hours. That's how quickly the moment connected with people. And the reactions weren't just about the play itself. They were about what it represented. Some people went as far as arguing she deserved all-star consideration. Not because of her season statistics or her performance metrics, but because of that one act. That one decision to step into a moment and say something without words. That one moment where she drew a line and made it clear that there are limits to what players will tolerate, even when officials won't enforce them. The actual performance of the game almost became background detail once the final minute concluded. Which is remarkable considering what Caitlin Clark had put together throughout the entire contest. 20 points, 6 assists, controlling the pace, playing through constant physical pressure, playing through an eye poke, playing through the chaos and the wrong calls and the frustration that comes from watching your teammates get hurt without consequence. And she still managed to lead her team to a dominant victory. Kelsey Mitchell added 17 points to the scoreline, steady and efficient throughout the game. She didn't need to do anything spectacular. She just needed to be reliable, to execute, to be there when her team needed a bucket. That's exactly what she provided. Natasha Howard delivered a double-double with 16 points and 12 rebounds, marking another milestone in what had been a strong season for her personally. The final score of 88-71 confirmed a dominant win, the kind of victory that looks impressive on paper and feels even better in person. But beyond the basic statistics, beyond the score, beyond the typical game summary, this victory carried real weight in the context of the season. It pushed the Indiana Fever into their first ever Commissioner's Cup final, setting up a matchup with the Minnesota Lynx on July 1st. For the first time in franchise history, the Indiana Fever were WNBA Commissioner's Cup champions. Those are the kinds of achievements that teams build seasons around. Those are the moments that get highlighted in highlight reels and referenced in season retrospectives. Those are the things that matter when you're building something. But for the fans in the arena that night, for the fans watching from home, for the millions of people who saw the clips circulating online, that wasn't the number that stayed with them. That wasn't the achievement that resonated. It wasn't the scoreline. It wasn't the standings. It wasn't the Commissioner's Cup accomplishment, as significant as that was. It was that moment, that message, the one delivered in the final minute when the result was already decided, but something else still needed to be said. The Sophie Cunningham takedown became the story of the night almost immediately. Within an hour, every sports media outlet that covered basketball was talking about it. Within 2 hours, it had spread to mainstream media outlets that didn't normally cover women's basketball. Within 4 hours, it was trending on social media platforms. By the next morning, the conversation had expanded far beyond people who followed the WNBA regularly. Sports fans who hadn't watched a women's basketball game all season were watching slow-motion replays of Cunningham bringing down Sheldon. The jersey sales happened faster than anyone could have predicted. Cunningham's number became one of the most purchased WNBA jerseys within hours. People weren't buying them because of her season statistics or her all-star potential. They were buying them because of what she had done in that moment. They were buying them because they understood the message. They were buying them because they respected the decision to step up when the system had failed. The commentary that followed was diverse and fascinating. Some people focused on the legality of the play, the fact that it was a flagrant 2, the ejection that followed. Some people focused on whether it was the right decision, whether it crossed a line, whether players should ever take matters into their own hands that way. But a significant portion of the conversation focused on why Cunningham felt the need to do it in the first place. Why would a player decide to deliberately foul out and get ejected in a game? What had to happen for that to seem like the right choice? The answer to those questions brought the entire arc of the game into focus. The May 30th injuries. The lack of consequences. The eye poke on June 17th. The technical foul on Clark for reacting. Mabrey's body check. The matching technical. The pattern of calls and non-calls that had added up to create a situation where official channels had failed, where the system designed to manage the game had proven inadequate, where players had no recourse except to address it themselves. Different commentators took different positions on whether this was acceptable. Some argued that players could never be allowed to take justice into their own hands, that it would lead to chaos if every disputed call led to retaliatory fouls. Others argued that sometimes the system fails and players need to be able to respond, that there are limits to what should be tolerated, that standing up to dangerous play is sometimes necessary even if it means getting ejected. What everyone agreed on, regardless of their position on the legality or morality of the play, was that it had resonated. The clip had connected with something in people. It had touched a nerve about fairness, about protection, about what happens when the people in charge fail to do their job. It had elevated Cunningham from a solid bench player to a symbol of something bigger, a symbol of a team that stands together, a symbol of players willing to respond when the system won't. The narrative overshadowed the achievement. The Commissioner's Cup final, the first in franchise history, became a footnote to a story about the final minute of a regular season game. The dominant victory, the 17-point margin, the solid performances from multiple players, these became context rather than the main story. The main story was what Cunningham had said without words. The main story was what it meant for women's basketball, for the WNBA, for professional athletics broadly. June 17th was not just a basketball game. It was a statement. It was a moment where the intersection of individual players, team loyalty, institutional failure, and player autonomy all converged into one decision in the final minute of a game that had already been decided. Caitlin Clark took an eye poke, absorbed a bogus technical foul, watched a teammate get body checked to the floor and receive another technical for it, and still led her team to an 88-71 victory. She did all of that while being constantly harassed by a player she's competed against since college, a player whose defensive approach was specifically designed to get under her skin. But Clark didn't let the officiating fail her. She performed at an elite level despite every obstacle the game placed in her path. She scored 20 points. She controlled the tempo. She led her team to a dominant victory. And then in the final minute, she watched her teammate deliver a message that transcended statistics and scorelines. Sophie Cunningham said everything that needed to be said in that final minute. No press conference required. No lengthy explanation necessary. Just one deliberate decision in the final minute when the outcome was already decided, but something else still needed to be addressed. The decision to bring down Jacy Sheldon. The decision to own it, to accept the ejection, to let the moment speak exactly as it was. A statement that there are limits. a statement that dangerous play will eventually be answered, even if officials won't answer it. The Indiana Fever are heading to the Commissioner's Cup final on July 1st against the Minnesota Lynx. This is an achievement that matters. This is a milestone in franchise history. This is something to be proud of, something that the organization will build on, something that positions them as a team on the rise. But after watching how this team responds when things get ugly, how they fight for each other when the officials won't, how they're willing to make sacrifices to protect their teammates, one thing is very clear. This team is built different. It's not just that they won the game. It's not just that they clinched the Commissioner's Cup final. It's that they did it in a way that said something about who they are as a group. They did it in a way that said, we protect each other, we stand together, we won't accept being victimized without a response. Those are the kinds of qualities that win championships. Not just individual talent, although they have that. Not just coaching, although they have that too. But team cohesion, team loyalty, a willingness to sacrifice for each other. Coach Stephanie White built something special in Indiana. She created a culture where players care about each other enough to take ejections if it means defending a teammate. She created an environment where standing up is valued, where silence isn't acceptable, where the message being sent matters as much as the final score. That's the kind of team that wins in May and June, not just in November and December. The Commissioner's Cup final on July 1st against the Minnesota Lynx will be watched closely now. Not just because it's a championship game, but because of what happened on June 17th. Not just because of the basketball that will be played, but because of the statement that was made. The Fever showed that they're a team willing to fight, willing to respond, willing to do what needs to be done even if it costs them. The Minnesota Lynx are a program with history. They're a program with multiple championships. They're a program that knows how to win when it matters. They're also about to face a Fever team that has just proven they have a different kind of commitment to each other. A commitment that goes beyond basketball. A commitment that says, this is our team. These are our teammates. We will respond if you test us. That's the message from June 17th. That's what the Sophie Cunningham flagrant 2 in the final minute represented. That's what the jersey sales and the social media conversations and the viral clips were really about. Not just a dirty foul. Not just a flagrant ejection, but a statement about who this team is and how far they're willing to go to protect each other. Looking back at the game, everything that happened before that final minute had been building toward it. The May 30th injuries, the missed calls, the lack of consequences, the eye poke on June 17th, the technical on Clark, the body check, the matching technical, all of it added up. All of it created the situation that made Cunningham's decision inevitable. All of it explained why, when the moment came with the game already decided, a player would deliberately foul and get ejected. That's the story of June 17th. Not just a game, not just a victory, not just a Commissioner's Cup final appearance, but a moment where players took control when officials wouldn't, where a team made a statement about who they are, where the score became secondary to the message being sent. The Indiana Fever are heading into the Commissioner's Cup final with something more than just talent and coaching. They're heading in with momentum. They're heading in with the kind of cohesion that comes from knowing your teammates have your back. They're heading in as a team that's been tested, that's responded to that test, and that's emerged stronger for it. July 1st against Minnesota will be fascinating to watch, not just for the basketball, but for the statement this team will make. June 17th wasn't ultimately about the eye poke, the technical fouls, or even the championship game it led to. It was about what happens when a system fails repeatedly and players refuse to accept failure anymore. Caitlin Clark suffered the eye poke and absorbed the penalty for reacting to it. Sophie Cunningham watched from the bench, remembering May 30th, remembering 2 injured teammates, remembering every moment the officials failed to protect the Fever. In the final minute, when the game was already decided, Cunningham made a choice. Not to win a game that was already won, but to draw a line. To say that there are limits to what teams will tolerate. To send a message that doesn't require words, that doesn't need a press conference, that speaks for itself the moment it happens. The Indiana Fever proved they're a team built on loyalty and willing to sacrifice for each other. As they head toward their first Commissioner's Cup final in franchise history, they carry more than just talent and coaching. They carry the kind of cohesion that comes from knowing everyone around you has your back, no matter what. That's the real story of June 17th. And that's what makes this team different.